So I'm really pleased to be at this session and to be chairing it. So I'm Catherine Robinson from the University of Manchester, and I'm really delighted that we've got Professor Anna Gupta from the Department of Social Work at the Royal Holloway, University of London. Now Anna's going to say a little bit about herself and her academic background. And then the session itself is going to be about participatory research in social care contexts. So I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm sure there are going to be questions. So just a reminder, use the chat function and then we'll have questions at the end. So I'm going to pass over to you now, Anna, to load your presentation and introduce yourself a little bit more.
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to give this presentation. Hopefully we'll have some discussions afterwards because, yeah, I'm by no means an expert on this. This is about just facilitating ideas and discussions. Yeah, as I'm Anna Gupta, I'm Professor of Social Work at Royal Holloway in the Department of Social Work in the School of Law and Social Sciences. I'm a social worker by background, and my area is child and family social work, both in practice and in my research. So the examples that I have talked about are, well, primarily the three examples are well, two are child and family oriented, one more generally, but hopefully in the discussion we can make links with other aspects of social care, because I know that I think a lot of people in the audience are from an adult social care background. But of course, I'm a generic, so I believe in generic social work. Children are in families, families have adult members as well as children's members have multi-generational, so I'm hoping, and living in very similar social contexts often, you know, with challenging sort of socioeconomic and in contexts and environments they're living in. So hopefully it'll be of relevance to us all. Now, I'm an MS Teams person, so fingers crossed. We've done it we've done it. Okay, so actually I've got to get to the beginning. Please just shout out if you can't see my screen or if there are any problems with this. So yeah, I'm going to be talking, as I said, on participatory research in social care contexts. I'm just going to get that down. And particularly looking at participatory research and the lived experience. So by talking about participatory research, my focus will be particularly on people who have lived experience. One of the studies is people who have lived experience of poverty, and the other two are of social work services. So I suppose starting off with why do participatory research with people who have lived experience? A couple of quotes. Humphreys writes, and I agree, participatory approaches arguably increase the validity of evidence since they attempt to identify the concerns that matter to people directly affected by public policy. And a lot of my work has been with ATD Fourth World, which I'll talk about later, but they're an anti-poverty human rights organization. They're an international organization, international movement, and they take a very participatory approach to their whole, that methodology of their work is about working alongside people with lived experience of poverty, and you know, working with people in poverty to get their voices heard in practice and policy arenas. So I've worked quite closely with them, and I'll talk about research, but I'd welcome, you know, I'd recommend that any people interested further in looking at participatory processes and what they call merged knowledge, have a look at their website and some of the documents, and I can always provide information. So, you know, this is one of the in one of the projects I did with them, a family member saying, you know, people who live in poverty know the solutions to their problems better than anyone else. And asking their opinions, giving them a voice is essential if we're to come to any true understanding of poverty and what can be done to address it. And I will also briefly mention a project I did with Breach Featherstone, where we opened up dialogues and connections between people living with and working in the area of adoption. So birth parents, adopted people, adopted parents, professionals, and although arguably not as participatory in the whole format as some of the ATD work, what we did, and I'll talk a little bit about this, is bring groups of people together in dialogue. And it was probably one of the most powerful experiences in my academic career, because, you know, we found that conversations across divides to open up new understandings, identify opportunities for co-production, and promote connections between groups who are often constructed in opposition. And certainly that was the case within the sort of adoption arena. So what do we mean by participatory research? And, you know, in any sort of framework, when you're thinking about participation, there is a spectrum. Participation in research can take many forms, and participation of people with lived experience can take many forms. They can be, you know, subject to you know, the research, predefined research methods at one end of the spectrum, towards at the other end being co-investigators through the research process, which is more commonly known as which is more commonly associated with participatory research approaches. And I mean, participatory research comprises a range of methodological approaches. So it can use different methodologies, techniques, but with some key sort of core values and objectives, such as the objective of sort of handing power from the researcher to the research participants, who are often community members or community-based organizations, or people who've had experience of services. And in participatory research, participants have control over the research agenda, the process, and actions. And most importantly, people themselves are the ones who analyze and reflect on the information generated in order to obtain the findings and conclusions. And obviously there are different degrees of this. It's on a spectrum to what extent researchers have involvement in that process. But key is that participants are centrally involved through the whole process. This is a website to an organization provides a lot of information on participatory research and different methods and examples of them. So it's really useful to have a look at. So some of the different methods, and these are the methods that are used on, that are mentioned in the participatory website, but in other documents, other information about participatory research. And they can involve focus groups, multi-stakeholder meetings, workshops, participatory action research, which is about group processes, and involvement in change and evaluating, reflecting on change with participants. Oral testimonies, story collections. I mean, narrative approaches. Stories are a really important part of getting messages across. And certainly, you know, if you look at just even in the public arena, the importance of counter narratives, challenging some of the status quo, hegemonic ideas. I'm just thinking, when I mentioned this, is thinking of Marcus Rashford and how powerful his story and his work has been. So humanizing some of the processes, and, you know, humanizing people's experiences. Also using other sort of media, visual methods, photo digital stories, photo voice, participatory videos. I mean, this is just in the corner here, it's just an example of using the photo voice. It was a study I wasn't involved with. It was Breach Featherstone and Kate Morris, who I work quite closely with in other things, but they talked to families who'd been involved with child protection and child welfare services, who were asked to sort of, yeah, use photo voice to talk about their experiences. And these will I think resonate with adult and as well as children's social care experiences. So hitting a brick wall, you know, quite powerful images, becoming a number, stepped up, stepped down, terminology used in children and families, stepping up to child protection, stepping down to children in need. So I think just, you know, usual visual ways of getting their voices and getting the messages across. So hang on, there we go. So I suppose a key thing is, a key element of participatory research is that it can be used as a way of promoting social justice, and particularly around getting the voices and the experiences of people more marginalized in society heard. So a key goal, I would argue, has to do with the fact that it's typically those with less power who speak through the research process. So people whose voices, whose agendas and research don't yet count as valid knowledge contributions. And certainly a lot of my work, which I'll talk about more, has been with parents who've been involved in the child protection system, and many of whom lost their children to the state, to adoption, and you know, groups of people who have often been seen as undeserving and whose voices have not been heard, but who in different formats over the last 6 or 7 years, but by different groups and researchers using participatory research approaches, are getting their voices heard, and actually more of a, you know, different networks starting up as a result of some of the participatory research processes. Certainly in adult care, there are obviously many groups whose are marginalized, who have less power, who have less voices. And I guess a really important element of any participatory research process is also looking at different ways of people expressing themselves. So photo voice and other formats are really useful, but it's, you know, particularly important to think about power issues and how people who have less power to get their voices heard in different ways. Maybe it's because of disability, it could be because of dementia, mental health issues, are getting are able to engage in sort of research processes. You have, I must say, in adult social care, I think, a much better track record of this than in children and families social care. You know, particularly the work of Peter Beresford and others in the mental health arena has been very, very instrumental in getting the voices of people with lived experience heard. So other key elements: participatory research involves active participation by all and reflection through ethical, open, respectful relationships alert to power dynamics, so that participants' voices, values, insights are central to the process of investigation. It's not difficult. It's not easy necessarily. there are, different perspectives, different voices, different dynamics that need to be dealt with as researchers, as sort of professionals, as a professional social worker, and as a sort of academic. It involves the giving of power. It involves lessening. I'm not the expert. I'm not that. It's handing over, and that can also, on a personal level, be quite scary. But it's also been extremely, for me personally, valuable, and quite fun at times. It involves doing research with and alongside rather than on or about, crucially. And even though projects may not always or even typically succeed in intervening in larger political processes, because they're often smaller scale, the aspiration is for more democratic and inclusive forms of knowledge making. And actually, as I said, certainly the parents' perspectives on the child protection process has gained, through various different participatory projects, built up a body of knowledge, which is really challenging the humanity or the lack of humanity in some of the processes that family members, children and adults, have to go through. It's not easy, but can be so valuable for all involved. I've got a short video. I would have liked to have done this with with sort of people who've been involved in participatory research processes, but just the organization didn't get it. But I've got a short video of some Camden parents, and they talk about the experience of being involved, but I'll come to that. Hopefully it'll work. Okay, so some examples. So these are just some examples, 3 examples from my work, and I would like us at the end of this to talk about other examples that people have in their areas of work. So this is Camden Conversations, which we called our family-led child protection inquiry, and this is what I've got the short video on. So basically, I'll give a brief summary before I show the video, which goes through some of this. Basically, Camden have a family advisory board made up of parents and other family members, and they together, myself and Annie, who's a parent with lived experience, who's formed an organization called Surviving Safeguarding. We did develop this project, and what it involved was training up parents in the research process, and then parents, together with a family group conference coordinator who was the note taker, interviewed and did focus group discussions with 25 families and 25 professionals in Camden. And then we did a workshop with the Family Advisory Board again and talked through the recommendations, and have made recommendations and a very colourful guide that's available on the web, and fed back into Camden Safeguarding Children's Board, who had commissioned the research. So it came from them, and certainly there's some recommendations that have been taken on board around the conference format, the atmosphere, the information provided. What came out very strongly was the need for advocacy, and ideally trying to develop peer support, peer advocacy, and learning exchanges. And these in different ways have been taken forward by Camden. What I think, and hopefully this will show, what I think in addition to what this has achieved is a change in culture. It's breaking down the barriers between us and them, us as professionals and them as those parents out there. And parents will do learning exchanges, so they will have sort of workshops with social workers and other family members. There are also some listening circles, their joint conferences. It has changed it has really broken down the barriers in some aspects of Camden's work, and I think been very valuable both for the professionals and for the parents. But what's been really interesting is this very small scale sort of study has attracted huge amount of interest in other local authorities. So it's had a ripple effect, not so much necessarily the findings, but more the process, the participatory process. And increasingly, Clarissa Fay, who you hear in the video that I'm about to show, and Annie have been called on to give advice and to work with other local authorities. Just to say, just to add, Annie did the transcribing and worked with us. She wasn't part of Camden. She worked with us around analysing the data, and really has written most of the report. So it was sort of quite truly all the way through very much participatory, with families being involved throughout. So I'm going to just show a 3-minute video talking about this. Hopefully it will work. Okay. Okay, let me know if for any reason you can't hear it.
Our family-led child protection inquiry.
I felt that my input was not only being heard, but was being truly listened to for the good of others.
As we say all the time, meaningful relationships are built upon trust and listening. And it's only through working together and taking that feedback on board that we can challenge the stigma attached to social workers in the community.
Like many other parents, I knew I wanted child protection to feel more supportive and less scary.
I feel that there is fear on both sides. So if we can get through this fear, we can move forward together positively.
I found this experience to be quite humbling.
I felt it was important for me, as a parent with experience, to be doing the interviews so I could ask the right questions and help the family members feel comfortable.
Through this review, we're opening up the feedback loop and publicising the views of families, and also being clear about how we're going to respond. In doing so, we're being accountable. I think that this is a significant step.
I learned so much being involved in this inquiry. It made me realise we have a voice that will be heard.
When people were asked questions during the inquiry, they often gave similar responses. A relationship works well when
you feel comfortable enough to open up and get the help that you need. And when people feel valued and respected.
You feel comfortable with the other person. There's trust and respect.
Camden Child Protection can change by
being human, stopping using words that make no sense to families, breaking boundaries and not being tied by tradition.
Changing the atmosphere, cutting the jargon. Who says it has to be the way it's always been?
Children need
love.
I had success the other day when
someone showed me genuine care and interest, and someone listened to me and explained to me.
I had a cup of tea with a parent and let them say what they wanted to. With my help, someone understood what was happening.
I think I am
a good person, patient, and doing my best.
A good person, kind, trying my best.
In an ideal world, a child protection conference would be
like a safe kitchen, an opportunity for the family to lead the plan, including advocacy.
More comfortable and make me feel less vulnerable, like a family group conference, giving more independent advocates for families.
Okay, sorry, guys. New share. Okay, hopefully we're back on the PowerPoint. Yeah, that was just a brief video that was made from it. But I think that the parents have really valued the experience, but so did the professionals. And I think it really was quite striking how similar, how when brought together and when the ideas brought together, there is so much similarity in what we want and hope to achieve. So another study that just was on a much larger scale and is called Understanding Poverty in All of Its Forms, a participatory research study into poverty in the UK. And I would recommend people look at this. There's a big report and some executive summaries. And it was ATD, it was led by ATD Fourth World, and again, people who have experience of poverty at ATD, they're called activists. They were centrally involved in the project, developing the questions, undertaking the workshops. It was very much workshop driven, using different methodologies with families living in poverty, with professionals, with others, and then being involved with the researchers in analyzing the data and coming up with the recommendations and producing the reports. Just some of the findings that they found, that they came up with, disempowering structures and policies, the stigma, blame and judgment, the emotional impact, the financial security, lack of choices, damaged health and well-being, recognized struggles, skills and contribution. I think, what's been really important in this whole project is also it's ongoing in terms of, it's not just a project, but it's also how we then have impact, use the data, disseminate it, work with family members from ATD to disseminate that information, and in different formats. Unfortunately, some of the dissemination has got slowed down by COVID. We were going to do a photography project, but yeah, maybe come back to that. So, but some of the quotes are great. Poverty kills dreams and cages the dreamers. They're really powerful information you get about people's lived experience, living in a state of fear and uncertainty. Just, these are some messages that I'll share with you that were identified that really is important for all social care professionals, I think, to be really mindful of about poverty, and the taking away control, shortening lives, stigma. Agreed services should be enabling and supporting. But I think really importantly from this, and what we'd hoped to do and still hope to do in some of the dissemination work, again through photography and other means, is point 6, which is skills and contributions made to society by people in poverty often go unrecognized. So really, highlight the skills and contributions made. And they'd already done a project called The Roles We Played, but just really important, but equally also to balance that with, individual resilience is no substitute for better system structures and policies. So just moving on, I mentioned the adoption inquiry, and I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but just the really, I think, so important involvement of different stakeholders in trying to come together and have dialogue with each other and break down what have so often been seen as insurmountable barriers was one of the really strong messages that it's possible and it's really important to do. And I just partly mention this because, I mean, we had, it comes on to my next slide, which is some of the challenges and limitations around participatory research. And the question is it real research? And this was a BASWA funded study that I did with Breach Featherstone, and it looked at the role of social work in adoption with a focus on ethics and human rights. And we defined it as the more traditional research methods of interviews, questionnaires, and we then and focus group discussions, but then we had targeted sort of focus group discussions, but then we also had these seminars where we brought the different stakeholders together, and we sort of did separate them out. I mean, it was much harder to analyze and to record all the data and to do in this forum, but it provided really valuable information. But also, again, the process itself was incredibly valuable, and the building of bridges between different groups. I always remember an adoptive mother and a birth mother. They were sitting at the same table as part of the discussion, and at the end of it, the adoptive mother said they didn't share children. They were just both invited to these seminars, and the adoptive mother said to the birth mother that she said, "I thought you'd hate me." And the birth mother said, "Why? I really don't want to hate you. I don't want you to hate me. I don't want to hate you. Why on earth would I want to think negatively and hate people who are looking after my children? I want to believe that adopted parents will be good and look after them." And there was just this really, really emotional sort of, just connection there around between these two mothers. But there were lots of difficulties in this. There were some challenges, and here I'm going to finish off soon just going through some of the challenges and maybe limitations, and maybe and hopefully talk about this more and any examples in the questions. So the first one, is it real research? In the hierarchy of research, which I don't personally agree with at all. We have the traditional sort of knowledge from RCTs, etc., seen as of more value than actually qualitative methods. And then you've got qualitative methods and participatory research, which in certain hierarchies is much lower down. I personally I don't agree with that at all. From a social science perspective, particularly, I think the medical sciences, I have another view, that is fine to have RCTs, but it's much more complicated in the social sciences. I certainly view knowledge as being socially constructed and influenced by power relationships within society. We need to understand how knowledge is situated and sustained by social processes that privilege particular understandings over others. And certainly from a critical epistemological perspective, I want to challenge those power relationships and get marginal voices heard within the processes. But it's certainly it is a question that's often raised. Is it real research? How can you generalize, etc.? Well, you can't with a small scale study, but they're very valuable knowledge that can be gained from that as well. Another sort of challenge, relationships are central, and it's really important to build relationships, but these relationships need to attend to power really centrally, and can be very complicated. They can be, they're not easy necessarily, and, for researchers, it's a shift of power. It's important to ensure marginalized voices are truly heard, within groups and community groups and groups of people who have lived experiences of services. There are power dynamics, and, clearly important to ensure marginalized voices are truly heard. Thinking about different ways of expressing people's views, like the multimedias, thinking about other issues around disability, around race and language, and how people might be marginalized in those sort of groups, about age, about ability. So really attending to intersectional power relationships and how these can play out in research processes. Ethical issues around confidentiality, boundaries, etc. I think these really need to be discussed and teased out in the beginning, and can be quite, certainly can be quite difficult for different personnel in the whole processes. Payment complications, certainly I feel very strongly that if I'm doing research, and with Camden, this was part of it, that I'm being paid, and that people, family members, people with lived experience should in some way be, also paid for their time. Maybe not able to be done at professorial salary, but there should be some sort of payment. This can be complicated within university structures, how you pay that, but also how it impacts if people are on benefits. So there are different methods, different ways of doing this, and obviously it's about talking to the people involved and what works for them. In some situations, it's vouchers so that it doesn't complicate benefits, etc. Setting up expectations, I think it's quite, certainly when working with parents in the past, I've I think people hope that getting the voices heard will affect change, and it's not increasing people's expectations when it's really difficult, in difficult circumstances, to get change, but still working on trying to affect change and working with people to affect change. But affecting change involves sort of power relations through lots of different structures, which is not always easy to do, but in my view needs to be doing. I'm sure there are lots of other challenges and limitations. How am I doing? Oh, nearly just a minute over. So I think that's the last slide. Yeah, it is. I will stop sharing and come back for any discussions. Thanks.
Great, thanks ever so much. That was really interesting and informative. And I know early on you posted a website address, and I think people would quite like that. I don't know whether the slides will be shared. I know the video will be available, but I think the website address will be useful.
Okay, yeah.
So,
I will.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, I'll put it up. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So are there any specific questions or comments? You don't have to ask a question, you can make a comment. So I can't see any raised hands, and I don't know whether that, we've got a question. So Liz, are you happy to ask it directly?
It wasn't a question, it was just to say that you can use the involve policy to pay people if you're struggling with your university to match them to a pay scale. It can be really useful to use that, which is something we use with our service user and carer group that we have involved in various elements of what we deliver. So it was just to share that with people.
Sure. And then Kira is actually asking the question I was going to ask about how yeah.
Sorry, yeah, go on.
Kira, do you want to ask that?
Oh, hi. My name's Clara. I'm really interested in how you mentioned quite a bit of the power issues, and I can see a lot occurring at different levels. And I was just interested in how you address that, or how you would mitigate that, and also if that's something that you would perhaps also kind of integrate in the analysis in some way.
Yeah, thanks. Really, I mean, I think it's, I suppose, crucially, it is about, I think, firstly, I'd say critical reflection, reflexivity on yourself and your own situation and your own power dynamics and your own values and beliefs, and how this might impact. If you are working, I mean, I'd start off by saying, if you don't believe the person in front of you is an equal, don't start the process. You know, if you feel that you are coming to this with prejudices and assumptions, which might be difficult to acknowledge, but I think you need to. And so I think that's firstly, reflect on self. I think it's, I guess it's about engaging people in dialogue and and thinking about how they are experiencing, have a constant dialogue about how different people are experiencing the process and giving them a voice. I think that so temperature checking really along the way. I guess being attendant to, if you're working with a group, how individual, but also sort of more structural power relationships might impact in that group, and being aware of how that might play out. Not just people who talk more, but also maybe people who are coming at it in different ways. So people who might have second English as an additional language might not want to participate in the same, might not be participating in the same way. So you're attending to that and how you can facilitate that. So I guess it's difficult to give an answer, but it's everywhere, and being attending to it at all time, but starting with yourself, really. And aware that it's not that comfortable giving up power. It's not that comfortable not knowing where it's going to go.
Sure. So we've had another comment in the chat box from Catherine Needham. Catherine, do you want to? I mean, it's something that I would agree with, but do you want to say something?
Yeah, just briefly, that we've been going around in circles for years at my university. If there are other universities that have sort of cracked this, I'd love to know. I think when they brought out the automatic opt-out for pensions, they kind of changed the pension, seemed to throw everything up in the air, and the kind of ad hocery that we'd managed on in the past suddenly wasn't acceptable. And I think we've had some colleagues that have just kind of burnt out trying to battle the system on this, and it's, I guess, work so carefully to get people involved, and then they're not paid on time or at all, or they're paid too much and then it has to be taken back. It's just shameful, and I wish we could crack it.
I completely agree. It's really, really difficult. I mean, in both the ATD and the Camden, it was the payments through those organisations, not through the university. Yeah, because I just avoid, in a way, if you're working with an organisation, if you can go through them, it's much easier than having them turn up, show their passport, sign all these declarations before they get £30 or whatever it is. So yeah.
So there's a question from Ingrid, and then from Carol in the chat. So Ingrid first.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, for this really great insight in your experience. So my question is, there are more participatory approaches emerging, like they called open innovation in science, co-development, co-design. I'm involved in one of the projects myself, and I am increasingly struggling with these different terms, and I wonder if you have any knowledge and experience on how to differentiate those different principles, or do they kind of, are they more the same, meaning the same, but using different terminology? So I wonder if you could elaborate a bit on this.
I'm not sure. I think they're often, I think co-production. So if you've got, you've got co-production, and what was the other? Yeah.
Co-development,
co-development.
design, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are often used interchangeably. I think that, I mean, there will be definitions of different terminologies. I think the key is how it's done in a way, and how certainly, yeah, co-production, co-development is something that I've seen used interchangeably, but I think in some ways it's how it's done really, and how the power is shared in those ways. But yes, no, there is a lot, and I'm not the person, I'm not an expert on what the difference is, I'm sorry. Yeah, because I think I've seen it used interchangeably a lot. Yeah. And different people might have different perspectives on which is which. Yeah.
There's a question from Carol. Do you want to ask it?
Okay, hi there, Anna. I'm just working at the moment. I'm putting together a research team for an Arts on Prescription research project, which is based on participatory action research methods. And I just wondered, when you were conducting the Camden Conversation study, what was the size of your research team and what specific roles were involved?
So I suppose there were 4 parents who did the interviews and the focus groups. They were supported by, so they were supported by family group conference coordinators who weren't social workers, but they didn't just do them on their own. They were supported, but mainly note taking. So they were, okay, so let me start from the beginning. Camden Family Advisory Board is about, well, it varies the different, but they're about 12 to 15 family members, and then there are others involved in that. And so we had broad workshops, we had bigger workshops looking at the questions and the questionnaire and what we'd use. And then there was the researchers that were 4 of them, I think, who did it with family group conference coordinators who took the notes, but the parents led the discussions, the questions.
Oh, okay. I'm only asking because for funding, we're being sort of asked to put the research team together, obviously, and then give very specific roles to everybody involved, whether they are, a researcher or, a co-researcher / participant.
I wonder if that could be picked up outside this meeting, perhaps if you could make contact with each other.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Take that.
Okay.
So there's a question from Catherine O'Driscoll.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just interested in the role that sort of participants have in shaping the research questions and how that dynamic works quite early on, because I'm based in a charity where we have quite a set structure for our intentions for what we plan to research over the next 12 months and longer term. And yeah, how do you work the power dynamic at that stage, whereby I don't want to go to a group of people with lived experience and say, I want to engage you on X, or is that how it works? Or do you invite them to submit ideas, or how can this be truly co-produced, I suppose?
I mean, I suppose this was, this was an established group already, the Family Advisory Board. So we didn't have to bring in a new group to that process. Similarly, a lot of the ATD groups are I mean, they're existing groups of people who know them. So, and this was really, it was very open. This is what we want to do. This is what Camden Safeguarding Children's Board want us to do, to work together with you to do a participatory research of sort of, we called it family-led. What, and it started off very open. What do you think we should be asking? It was an existing group with I suppose, with a very broad terms of reference to do a participatory approach with families to come up to understand better what families' experiences of child protection were in Camden and what we can do about it. And then, so it started off very broad, and then a series of workshops later got narrowed into a set of questions that went through a lot of changes.
So I was going to say one final question, but in fact another one's popped in. But sorry, I can't work out who's asking the question about building trust. Do you want to ask that directly?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, thanks for your talk. Very interesting. Yeah, you mentioned building trust, and I think it's the opposite of power dynamics, really. That's very, if not handled well, it destroys trust. And I just wondered what the kind of, if there's any practical steps you'd taken that you think contributed to building trust with the people you're engaging with, that come to mind.
I think, which is a bit hard to do at the moment, spending time, having just not just business meetings, not just meetings about it, but sort of having space and time for more general discussion, getting to know each other. I mean, Tim, who runs the Camden Family Advisory Board, is really good with that. You know, it was interesting when I first sort of went to my first meeting there, I was feeling, come on, Tim, get on with it. We're here for a purpose. And I realized that his sort of checking in, talking to people, sort of, you know, just talking about everyday life and what people are doing and how they're getting on and what's going on was so important, as was the cakes, the coffee, the food. You know, being human with each other was so important. If we'd gone in straight, I'm here, I'm to do this, you know, and I learned that quite quickly, that, you know, you get, it's a few hours of which probably the main task of the work will be only a part of that, but the rest will be quite enjoyable too.
Thank you, it's really helpful.
Yeah.
So the last question from Sarah Alden. Are you still with us, Sarah?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, hi. Yeah, just what I've written, really. I was just really interested in when you mentioned that Camden Conversations had led to a bit of a ripple effect and other local authorities had picked up on the idea, and it generated some interest. I just wondered if adult social care teams had been in touch or got in touch, or was it mainly sort of children's social care?
It's been mainly, it's, well, as far as I'm aware, Tim's
Yeah.
been the one who's fielded a lot of that.
Okay.
And Clarissa and Faye, but Clarissa and Faye have been particularly, they're the parents, have particularly worked with children's services.
Okay.
So has Tim, I think, and we've got a group around that's called Local Authorities That Listen. It's a sort of informal group of you know, probably about 20, but they're all children's services, and we meet about looking at different ways. This is not research, but it's of incorporating family perspectives. But as it's only been children, and that's
okay.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be, really. We should actually all be joining up, you know.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it's something that, of course, can be applicable across, across the board. Yeah, definitely. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, so thanks ever so much, Anna, for a really informative and interesting presentation, and thank you, very much for fielding so many questions, and to the audience for being engaged and asking those questions. So as you know, the recordings will be available. If you need to make contact with Anna, I think you're on the web anyway, but we can facilitate that. So thanks ever so much, and
thank you.
Hope to see many of you at the next session we have.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.